let's take a look at the 45, the Jacobite Revolution, or Rebellion of 1745. This is Bonnie Prince Charles's invasion. And it's an interesting subject. There aren't a lot of games on this. There's Charlie's War Redux now from Red Sash, which, wow, that's, you know, I think the same system as Year of the Hats, and then I got Cockpit of Europe kicking over there that I got to get to at some point. But that's a pretty hefty game to be facing. And this is intended initially to be a lighter game, and then the designer said, well, I added lots of chrome in it. Well, okay. There's a fair amount in it. I don't think it could do with less chrome. I think what it could do with is not having every unit specified in location, etc., which is going to cause some problems. The setup is just a nightmare. Basically, and this is like, you know, the same problem that I have with a lot of operational World War II games, but at least you usually have unit designations. So, hey, it's this division and you can break it into things. Well, you don't have that kind of designations in place. So each piece is individually labeled. Probably the closest that comes to it that I can think of is the Der Weltkrieg games, which specify all the units. And honestly, there's not much to what a unit is except for its strength points. It's a fairly simple system. When you have a fairly simple system where the units don't have a lot of differentiation between them, I mean, like the Coldstream Guards, the Black Watch, all that, that's the same as everything else. There's some crappier units, but, you know, they're just treated as that. This could be a strength point game pretty easily. A little bit of stuff that I'm not convinced is particularly necessary, not necessary, that's particularly realistic about the treatment at the regimental level, especially given that there's like detachments you can send out and everything. I think this could just be handled with strength point markers. I don't think that's what the designer's talking about, though. I think the designer wanted to put specific units, you know. So here we have the 1st Royal Scots. Great. They're a strength point of regulars. You know, that's all you really need to know. And then they have this really obnoxious, I'm like jumping into this on the intro here, this really obnoxious decision to use the block format, the block game format of showing strength points. That's been tried in other games. I don't like it in block games, but at least there you have a standard, hey, the piece is standing up. The top value is what it's got as strength. It ends up confusing me, but once you start putting it on flat counters, man, it stops making any sense. Anyway, that's a design decision that is just horrible. I've seen one of the reviews complaining about the component quality. Well, I think the component quality is pretty decent, to tell you the truth. First of all, you got a matte map, which helps a lot. The only problem I have, the Irish are almost impossible to read the counters. There's a gloss on the counters, which kind of sucks. And, you know, the printing is fairly small. And there's not a lot of information being given there, you know. There's a little bit of differentiation between infantry and cavalry. It could probably be done in a different, in a way that information could have been devised more easily, especially if you're just talking strength point counters. You know, put a figure of a man on some of them and a figure of horse on the others, but whatever. But here's where the nightmares really start. This is the reinforcement charts for the different players, and you know, this really has to do with the specifying each regiment by where, you know, by what it is. Instead, the counter mix doesn't necessarily seem to work with the game, which is to say, They came up with some errata for the Jacobites, which cleaned up my couple of Jacobite units that I had kicking around that I couldn't figure out where to place. But I have a few of the British Hanoverian units that I don't think are listed anywhere, and that didn't get caught in the errata. As far as I know, there's no other errata. I checked over, BGG has this, and this covered some of it. And we'll talk a little bit about the errata in a moment. But it also, there was, I think, a copy of this kicking over at Web Grognard's, but that's got a 404 on it right now, so I don't know, maybe I'll resubmit the same file and say, hey, you should really have a copy of this there, just to make sure there's a couple of copies online in the event that BGG somehow loses its copy. I pretty much count on Web Grognard's for my older games. Something like this I was actually surprised to see was over at BGG. A lot of times, some of the older games that, haven't maintained a lot of popularity, just never made it over there, because in the early days of BGG, there weren't a lot of wargamers involved, and those that were probably weren't these are that. There's also the problem of the Hessians, who are this dark blue, and the Jacobites, who are dark blue, which I think is going to cause us some difficulties in discerning the different counters. What else do you have? You have a set of charts and tables, and you can see some chrome in here. You've got, diplomacy type thing, where you get to roll to see if certain clans come in. It's got attrition rules. Some restrictions on the Hanoverians, which, hey, if they don't have enough pieces in the game that they're supposed to, that's going to cause some problems. It doesn't look like there's a lot of charts and tables in the combat. This is the errata. It's just a page, basically. And that's great, but, However, what I wanted to talk about with the errata, one of the odder things that I saw here, it's baked into the rule book already. As if maybe, I don't know what happened. I understand this a little bit more on the Avalon Hillside when typesetting programs and stuff were more difficult, some of the earlier games, where maybe they had the whole rule book set and then said, ooh, we made some big mistakes. And then what I don't like is that they put it in as questions and answers. It's like, unit this doesn't have a setup location. Where should it be? And they tell you, this rule seems wrong. Yes, it is. Here's what you should use. I mean, what? But here you'll have like counter errata. Okay, counter errata I can understand because sometimes the rules aren't done. Chart errata, I can see that. Map errata, fine. Although I don't think has anything to do with the map. Oh, it's probably on one of these boxes that I'm not planning on using. But there's other places in the rules themselves where they've interjected some of the errata directly. Yeah, I'm looking for a case of it just because it was so, it struck me as so odd because they really had to reformat the rule book. Whatever typesetting they're using, they're throwing that errata in as like a clarification to a rule or correction to a rule or something, instead of fixing the rule itself. There aren't a lot of them, but it's a very strange thing. Looked at the people involved in this, and I was kind of, okay, Benikoff, I recognize him. I don't know the main designer here, but Youst, obviously. But what it kind of excited me, I saw E.R. Bickford was the rules editor, and I thought the rules would be very good because of that. Mainly because he seems to very much agree, hey, you should get the rule book right. There's some places where there's, I think, some issues with the rules, and we may touch on some of them. But in terms of, that may be more a matter of why didn't the playtesters catch this? You can't expect the rules editor to catch all the things that aren't clear. And it's not like the rules are, you know, full of typos or anything like that. And that part of it seems fine. And they seem fairly clear to read for the most part, but there are a couple of places where reading through the rules, I did have kind of a, that seems in contradiction to something else I saw. But that's not the kind of thing that you expect the rules editor to necessarily catch. They may catch some of it. So the victory conditions to this are pretty simple. The Jacobites have to take the crown of England and Scotland, the two crowns. And the Hanoverians have to kind of stop them. And there's sort of a partial victory if the Jacobites can get themselves installed well in Scotland. Historically, Charlie actually did a pretty good job of scaring the crap out of George II and his government in terms of how far he got. But he may have rushed things a little bit too much. Well, he may have rushed things a little bit too much. He made some fairly impetuous operational decisions that put his army at great risk, and eventually it all ends up at Culloden with, you know, the army destroyed and a total loss. The board itself, let's look, it's point to point. You got these little drawings here. You got water indicates you're going to have a river crossing. You got 3 different types of fortifications. That may be something with the fortifications is where I had a problem. You have marking to indicate where there are mountains. Clan name. I see that here, but you got the names of the clans up here, and that's important vaguely. I think they're referred to otherwise. Some ports, because you're going to have boats in this thing. Regional borders to indicate there's different regions that it matters where Charles is at various times and what he can do. And then some movement reductions by routes, or costs by routes, basically. The dash lines are going to cost you more. What else? We have these little semi-sea routes, which the enemy can, the Hanoverians basically, can interdict Jacobite movement through those areas. At the beginning of the game, the only pieces on the board are Hanoverians. Well, more or less. Over here in Brittany, you have Charles and some money, some weaponry, cannons, a few leaders, some more money, a couple of Irish, and a French. And he's got to land in Scotland and basically, you know, get the clans to be excited about him, raise the standard, claim the crown, this, that, and the other. And he's got a number of steps that he has to take. And more or less, they don't look like they're things that you have a lot of flexibility in doing. And then it's going to be maneuvering around, trying to get in a positional advantage for whatever fights are going to happen. Okay, let's take a look. Unfortunately, see, I've got this on this little table because it didn't fit nicely. It didn't fit north-south on the big table. And one of the reasons I need north-south is the units have to face with their strength aligned to the north. And I guess that's even if they're in these little boxes, which is one good reason not to use those little boxes, I guess. All right. So I would kind of like to be at this table, but I don't think I can. So I guess we'll go through our sequence of play and such not here. So the reinforcements, most of them, well, many of them, and all the Hanoverians appear to be, except for the Hessians, appear to be relegated just to, hey, it comes in on a given turn. For the Jacobites, it's a little different. We have them placed over here. A lot of those come in due to conditional events, and I may have some of them in the wrong places. The ones that had a date associated with them, I put on the date, and I think that, and I know that's right. I'm just not sure that I might not have put some accidentally in here yet. Oh, and there aren't enough pieces either. So some of the reinforcements that are scheduled for specific dates, notably resources like money, artillery, arms, stuff like that. And that stuff can be destroyed in use, basically. There aren't enough counters to put everything out initially. So I'm going to have to be kind of careful, at least with the Jacobites, and make sure that that I'm getting the right units at the right time. Now, luckily, there aren't that many Jacobites on there, but I still have to wade through that big chart, which indicates all kind of Jacobites that aren't allocated there. They're the guys over here who come in, you know, when you raise the standard or whatever, or go into a specific location. So that's one problem. But another problem is there aren't enough oh, I know where one of the rules is. It has to do with capturing ships. One of the rules that, or one of the things that is not available is there are not enough Jacobite and French fleets. Now, the assumption may be that these things are going to get sunk and used during action. It appears that countermix is a limit for things. Oh, here are a bunch. No, there's a bunch of Jacobites that I could not find as well. These guys here, they may be controlled. They're all regional names. I think they may be controlled in the rules. But this guy, the Covenanters, I don't think are mentioned anywhere, kind of like the Hanoverians here. And we're going to wade through as best as we can. But it really looks to me like this did not get enough blind testing in terms of, hey, here's the components that you're going to get if you own this game. You know, this is what we propose to you. It doesn't look like they got to yeah, I got enough to play this knowing it. Now, from what I've heard about people who've done play testing for Decision games, sometimes they don't really listen to their playtesters and stuff, even nowadays. And we all know, I have not been trusting them. I don't think I've bought a recent game from Decision Games, mainly because, you know, I don't want to spend $30 for a magazine game or something like that. And especially when I know their quality issue. There are a couple DG games that I've picked up, like Struggle for Galactic Empire and the Axis Empires, which seemed better handled than my old experiences with their magazine games, or like this, a small box game. But they do not have a good reputation in general still, and they also definitely have not impressed me, but I've looked mainly at some of their older stuff, and that may be one of the problems. The newer stuff that I have looked at has been okay, but I've still been unwilling to get burned again, you know? Okay. So the sequence of play, you look up where you get units, and if you have units that you want to recruit on the board that are in the proper place that they can recruit, you can flip them over. These guys are detachments, so they can't, but if we grab a unit like this, you can flip it over, and you have to be careful to maintain its proper strength. So like, let's say this is a 1 strength unit, you'd have to flip it this way and keep its strength there. And by being on this side, it means it's recruiting. If it moves or something, it stops recruiting. And if it makes it to the end of the turn in this state, it'll pump up another strength point, as long as it's in the right place. Okay. Then you get to a naval phase where you can load ships, and you can basically do one thing with your ships. You can move like one sea area or from a sea area box to a different sea area box along those lines. So you see a lot of fast naval movement, which I find a little odd from what I understand about it, but okay. Naval interception is the only kind kind of interception in this game. It's a, you know, a point-to-point system. A lot of those have complicated rules about interception. This does not. The core system to this is really kind of maybe overly simple, but if you're in the same sea area that somebody else is, you can try to catch them. Then, okay, so here's why it's a strength point game, right? You're allowed to create detachments, break off strength points from your units, but you have to kind of mark down who they're from or something like that. Maybe the rules aren't all that clear about that, but there's a hint of that in them. And then the unit can't get any bigger until, like, I guess the strength's been absorbed by someone else or something. It's all very, like, they're trying to have things both ways. They're trying to imply that there's, like, a lot of detailed keeping track of where strength points are from, but it doesn't really seem to be supported by, you know, the specifics of the rules. You can transfer strength points between units. Anyway, you can move your units. They have movement points spelled out over here. Movement allowance 3 and 4 basically, but leaders and cav can go 5. And the costs are based on the type of transitions you're making. If you want to force march, you roll on here to see what percentage of your troops you lose by doing so. Now this is always rounded up, which means like 1 strength point force marching is a lot worse than taking a fairly large army. In fact, the best thing you can do is take kind of a large army around on force marching, which is completely, you know, bogus. There's also an attrition, which we'll get to in a bit. But they use the word attrition losses here rather than forced march losses, just to confuse things. There are overrun rules. Basically, a large force can overrun a very tiny force if it's not in fortification, and there's some weird shit that happens. That appears to be the only time that cavalry can withdraw from combat is during an overrun. Then you'll be doing combat, which I don't even remember. Yeah, you count up the strength points and you get a differential, and you'll get results from that. And from what I understand, this combat table is supposed to be really, really bloody. The results from it will be a number of strength points lost, attacker, then defender. An asterisk means that you have a potential leader loss. You pick a leader and roll to see if he dies. R's, you have to retreat your force. And if you have nowhere to retreat to, you're destroyed. A rout, you split your force into 2 equal stacks and you retreat them both. And this might actually end up splitting a regiment, if you have to, into a regiment and a detachment. For actual combat, you're going to have modifiers. So the way it works is the phasing player, let's go over the combination of movement combat. When you move into a space, if there's an enemy there and he's, whether he's in a fortress or not, you have to stop, but there are some apparent exceptions to that. And again, that's in some of the fuzziness of the rules. And you'll have to have a battle at the end of the turn. Now, it looks to me like you can group your units to attack in an area, which is often not the case in the CDG type implementations of games in this era, because it was very hard to coordinate forces. You can group your units in one area and attack with all of them, as far as I can tell. But you can't do that for overrun, which makes sense. You're moving a stack for an overrun. For movement, you can pick up units as you travel, but as soon as a unit stops moving, you know, like if it's dropped off as it's moving or whatever, you can't start moving it again. which means you're not going to be able to coordinate units from two spaces in an overrun unless one is picking up the other force. Okay. So for the actual combat, you're going to get die roll modifiers based on whoever the most senior leader is, a combat ability. Some of them have minuses. Artillery is worth something. Every 5 strength points of cavalry, unless you're in the mountains, in which case, or rough terrain, in which case, no, you're not going to get to. If the Jacobites are the attacker, they get a +1. I think they have to have at least 50% Highlanders, but all the losses will come off Highlanders. Highlanders are their dark counters. If the defender's in a strong point, which is one of the types of fortifications, I believe it's these little yellow things, there's a -2 to the die roll for attacking, but they have to actually be in it, and there's a limit to how many strength points can be in one. Rivers give a -1, mountains give a -1, but only if the defender's a Jacobite. Okay. Now, the other kind of fortresses work a little different, but strong points work just like attacking someone in the open. So the way the combat works is the attacker figures out their differential, rolls a die, and applies the results. If neither side is forced out of the hex, for example here, and it looks to me like that looks like a 10-sided die, but I believe it's a 6-sided die. In actuality, just because everything else is running off 6-sided dice and they just talk about dice. If both sides are still there, then the defender has the option to become the attacker. Now, the only reason you'd want to do this, I think, is to get the Highland charge bonus. I can't see another reason. There's no other advantage to being the attacker. If you don't want to become the attacker, the other player must continue to attack, and they can't stop. And you can jump in and become the attacker at any time, as long as you weren't the attacker before. And the option to switch keeps happening, but the original attacker is always forced to be the attacker, I think, if the defender doesn't want to be the attacker. Okay. And they have the option to take the initiative back and attack again if they want. Yep, here we got the reinforcements are actually listed in here too. So all the errata that's on this errata sheet is embedded in the rulebook. I don't know how that happens. I mean, this is actually not even put in, this is put in as a section, reinforcement errata, but it's just all filtered in. Was one portion of the game, was the game at one point published with not the errata embedded in the rulebook? So the errata was necessary? Or what happened? I don't know. Why would you publish the game with the errata still kind of showing? It's kind of like having your underwear showing, no? All right. So let's talk about fortresses. So the difference between attacking in a field battle and a fortress is in general the attacker only gets 1 round to attack in the fortress. Now there are other factors at play here. You still have your leader bonuses. An engineer gets to be added or subtracted in addition to whatever leader there is. But if your senior leader is the only engineer you have in the space, you can't use him twice. The attacker gets a bonus for siege guns, which do not help in regular combat. The defender gets a bonus in Riverbox. The 2 different types of fortresses, the gray and the red, if I got this right. The gray are minor fortresses. Those double the defensive strength. The red triple it. And the fact that you only get 1 round of combat means that it may take a while to, complete the siege. If you have an engineer, you're allowed 1 extra round of combat, and if you have a siege gun, you're allowed 1 extra round of combat. So you could get up to 3 rounds of combat in 1 turn against one of these fortresses. And we got the stacking limits on these. No? Guess not. Are they spelled out in here? Yeah. So strong points can only hold 3 regiments. Well, 3 regiments, you know, isn't very much. And what it means is to get that -2 bonus, you have to have a fairly small force there. So you can only really kind of defend yourself against a small force by being there. Minor fortress is going to hold up to 6 regiments, major fortress up to 9. Anybody over that limit is going to be outside the fortress. You can come out and help them defend, or you can hide in your fortified strong point, for example, and just watch them get butchered. And then you might get butchered afterwards. And then all the forces on the board have to be checked for attrition, which we'll go over in a little bit. Then we switch, I believe, I don't remember who goes first. The Jacobite goes first. The Hanoverians get a player turn that's exactly like the Jacobite player turn. And then you move the game turn marker down. Yeah. All right. Let's see what we might know. So, reinforcing your regiments. Okay, so here is the rule. All right. Reinforcements may not recruit beyond their full strength, including any detachments. So you have to keep track of what regiments have made detachments. Yeah, that's kind of a pain in the butt. I didn't think that rule was there. If a regiment is eliminated, it can be rebuilt. Now you have 2 options here. If it has a detachment on the board, the regiment can fly over and join that detachment at the strength of that detachment. It replaces the detachment. And those detachments can be 1 or 2 strength. If the regiment it does not have a detachment on the board, it's put some 3 turns later, I believe, or is it 6? 3 turns later, and it'll be able to recruit to be a 1 strength point unit on that turn at its home base. And then it can continue recruiting over other turns to get up to strength. So if you have the detachment on the board, though, you don't have to replace the detachment. You could put the unit 3 turns in the future as a rebuildable unit, but that detachment still counts against its strength. And I'm going to have to do some paperwork to write down detachments that aren't attached. And I may just decide to say, screw that shit. Because it seems, like I said, the game seems like it could just be a strength point game as far as I'm concerned. But we'll keep going with this. Okay, Jacobite clan regiments may recruit in a single turn in any numbers, but only in their own clan boxes, those with their own name. And they can't do so until Prince Charles has landed in mainland Britain, i.e. not on an island. Other Jacobite regiments may only recruit in the box location noted on the counter as the unit's starting location. Well, I don't know. Is that these guys? Like Northwest is a region. Not that. I don't know if, I don't know what are non-clan units. I guess Oliphant of Gosk may be a non-clan unit. Lord Nairn is definitely a non-clan unit. So, but Gordon is, I think, one of the clans. So you have to kind of look for that. Now, this does not tell you where it starts. Oh, yeah, it does. So this says Perth on it. So that's where it's going to be able to recruit. All right. Now, they don't give you... Each location on the map has a region and a number for the box. They don't give you that information. There's no gazetteer or anything like that to help you find where these things are capable of recruiting. So that's going to be another bit of mechanical complexity to coping with this damn thing. And I mean, that's the main reason that you do need individual units, is the recruitment values. I think, though, that you could kind of tweak the game and allow a stream of units to be built up and moved forward without losing too much from the implementation. I just feel like this is a really, really heavy-handed, hey, let's put a lot of mechanical burden on the players. You're going to have units that are weakened that you probably want to regenerate somewhere, but now you have to figure out where they'd regenerate and whether or not it's worth moving back there, right? So quite often you're just going to say, screw it, and just keep going with your units because it's too much fucking work to hunt through this whole thing and try to figure out where you can regenerate those units. Maybe if there were some play aids like the gazetteer that helped you find, you know, where each clan was, but as it stands, and even that, paging through that and everything, that would be a pain in the butt too. So as far as I'm concerned, there's probably going to be a huge playability penalty to this that's going to have as much of a historical hit in terms of how a reasonable person would play the game. You know, reasonable in the sense that, hey, I'm having fun playing a game. I don't want to be spending the whole game, oh, where the hell is this? Yeah. So if the game's mechanical complexity exceeds what the players are willing to do, right, in order to play well, you're going to get less realistic results than a game which tries to abstract some of that away. And, you know, that's the case with everything. And in this case, it just looks like that mechanical complexity is going to be way over my limit for this kind of game, especially given the rest of the game. You know, it's not La Grande Guerre, right, which has less mechanical complexity than that. All right, where else are we? Okay, what about the Hanoverians? Oh, we got some others. English and Welsh Jacobites may only be recruited in the regions noted on the counter. Now, I don't know when some of those units come into play. I haven't found any description of that, but I've read through the rules, and I think there's a hint of those things coming into play. I don't think there's any hint of these 3 Hanoverian regiments, so we'll see. A maximum of, okay, for the Hanoverians, 3 Hanoverian regiments may recruit in any region of England or Wales. Each region can have its own 3 recruiting regiments. The 4 government Scottish regiments are the only units which can recruit in Scotland. These can recruit in boxes noted on the back of each counter. Loudons may recruit in any Campbell clan box. Hessians and Dutch Swiss may not recruit. Other Dutch can recruit in the Dutch ports, which are up there. You're going to have both French, there's a number of French ports, and they're kind of connected by these land transit boxes. Those things, these transitions are 1 per game turn. So you can't go flying around France real fast. All right. Only 1 Hanoverian regiment may recruit in a region where both sides have at least 8 regiments. Now, it doesn't say anything. It seems like you can recruit in an area that's in opposed hands. Doesn't seem to be a restriction on that, is there? Doesn't seem to be. So, as long as you don't have a lot of forces in a region, if you're getting overrun, say in the north of England or whatever, you can raise a fair amount of regiments there. You can raise your 3 regiments or whatever. Recruit. But it's probably sequential, so, no, it wouldn't be. Okay, because you select the recruitment, so if you have 7 regiments, you're kind of at perfect, right? If you have an arms counter in a region, you can expend it and accelerate your recruiting. You announce this when? We don't tell you that. And that's important because there's 2 times that it could reasonably be released. One time is when you announce your recruitment, And that's when I'm going to try to do it. But, geez, I don't know if that's even going to be physically possible. Again, not physically, but I don't know if that's going to put too much of a mechanical memory burden, which, I have to maybe use a little Post-its or something to try to remember that I've got that in play. Or the other time would be when you're actually performing the recruitment, which is, I believe, at the end of the turn. What that does is it'll allow any of the units to regain 2 strength points rather than 1. Now they say at the end of the recruiting phase. So maybe, where is the recruiting phase? Well, there is no recruiting phase. There's a reinforcements phase, but the recruiting phase isn't spelled out in here. And I believe it happens sometime after movement. Maybe that's here. Okay. Recruiting units that do not move during movement or engage in combat during combat each gain 1 SP. So I think somewhere in here, we're going to put a recruiting phase. That seems to be desired. And of course, that's not in the errata. Anything that's in the errata is already in this rulebook, which just shows you, the degree to which whatever play testing or whatever was not completed effectively. Oh, look, the developer's listed on the play testers. This is a really bad sign. Yes, the developer probably play tested, but you don't count that in. The developer's in charge of assimilating all the play testing, including his own. Shouldn't really be listed on there, and that tends to lead you to believe there weren't a lot of playtesting groups that got a copy of this. If there's only, 4 people listed on there, and one of them is the developer. Yeah, right. Okay, let's see, what else were we looking at here? Right, okay. If 5 or more regiments lose a battle with a routed result, they're going to drop some weapons, and then an arms counter will be put in the box in which the battle took place. If all the arms counters are in play, no more may be constructed, but there are quite a few on there that I could steal. Those aren't in play yet. I don't know what happens, though, if you're supposed to come in with arms counters and there aren't any available. That's not covered as far as I know. Let me swap out batteries here. All right, let's keep going. Naval movement. So each of your ships is allowed to either leave a port, enter adjacent sea area, move from a sea area to an adjacent, move from one sea area to an adjacent port, move from a transit box to the sea patrol box, make an island move, or remain in the same location. There's a number of different types of ships. You have warships that look like this. Privateers, which are one-point ships, they look very similar to that. There's one right there. And then transports, which, I don't know, I can't find one. Probably have a British one kicking around here, no? No. Those are just some spare ships that, like the extra units, didn't really come across. There's a transport. Okay. Now, most ships can carry a number of strength points equal to their own strength points. Privateers can only carry 1 ground strength point. I think all the privateers are 1 strength point. There may be a 2 strength point privateer. I don't remember. Transports are noted as having a strength of 1 with no attack capacity. They can't initiate combat, and they can carry 5 strength points of units. The different boxes. So sea transits always have an interception bonus of +1. And that's where you're going to normally be when you move into an area. But if you want to keep patrolling the area, you can go into the patrol area. Those have different pluses. This one's +3, obviously. But we go up here, and it's only +2. It depends on how easy it is to hunt the enemy in an area. You skip over a lot of shit. Only Hanoverians can enter Ireland. But only Jacobites live in Ireland. Anything exciting here? Nothing too exciting. Island moves. The Outer Hebrides and Orkneys are linked by coastal routes. You can use these for naval movement between ports on the islands and the mainland in either direction. A ship making an island move may move along 2 minor routes. It may pass through boxes occupied by enemy units, but may not enter an enemy-occupied port. Island moves cannot be intercepted. And you're allowed to transport. Jacobite ground units may not move between the Hebrides and the mainland by land routes if 10 or more Hanoverian naval strength points are present. So this is kind of weird. I think what it's saying is that I can sail along these, taking the island moves. If I can find the right color. Here they are. That I can sail around these and not possibly get intercepted. And that I can also land move on these, but not if there's enough strength points of enemy there. Let's see what it says. 10 or more Hanoverian naval strength points in the Western Islands Sea area. That's a lot of naval power. The biggest ships are 4s, so you're going to have a fairly big fleet to be able to stop that. And that says that the ground units may not move by land routes. I don't know what that means in terms of, so we have this island moves. A player may use these moves for naval movement between ports. It says nothing about land movement. It talks about ships doing it. But then here it talks about ground units making, and this is the kind of thing that worries me. It just feels like, you know, just reading this, it doesn't make sense, right? And there's quite a few such little cases where, you know, each individual paragraph kind of makes sense, but even ones that are right next to each other stop making sense. Okay. So interception of fleets. If you're in a transport or patrol box, you're allowed to try to intercept. And you get to add the modifier +1 through +3 to the die roll. And you need to get a 12 or more. You total the combat strength of all your warships and privateers in the box, add the number and a die roll. And if you get a 12 or more, then the fleet that attempted to intercept, which could be in either sea transit or sea patrol, and whatever ships it's trying to intercept go into the sea battle box. I think you're allowed to intercept from both of these boxes with 2 separate rolls, as far as I can tell. You can certainly fail at one and go again due to the examples, but I think you can also do it even if they're in the sea combat box. When you actually get to sea combat, the phasing player will be the attacker. Right? The phasing player is not the guy who intercepted. Interesting. Well, not necessarily. It can be. Either side could be the interceptor, right? No, only the phasing player can intercept. Okay. Which feels kind of weird because it's not like you're intercepting during movement, but since you can only move 1 space per turn, any space that you enter, the enemy will have a chance to intercept you during that turn. So it works out. It just sounds weird to call it interception. You come up with an odds ratio, and you look for the naval combat table, which of course doesn't exist. This is not used. There's a bunch of errata saying that. All right, great. You consult the sea battle table. Wonder where that shit is. It's not in the charts. Oh, yay, here it is. All right. And you're going to get a number of losses in full squadrons and whatever's on board them. An asterisk indicates possible ship capture. Okay, we may see more here than's in the rules. When I read the rules, this didn't make entire sense. The victorious player rolls a die for each ship lost by the opponent. On 1 or 2, the ship and any units it's transporting is captured. Any gold arms, artillery, or siege guns taken may be used by the capturing player if his ships have the transport capacity to carry them. Okay, this looks exactly the same. The victorious player can't cast units or resources overboard. Place captured items under the victorious ship counters. Okay, I have just captured the enemy ships. What the fuck does that mean? Not explained anywhere. Are they just destroyed and I've just captured what's on them? Or, which is as far as I can tell what they mean, but they do say the ships are captured. Or is this why I have extra ships for the English? I don't know. I really don't know. And yeah, the results are all here. They're the same things. Ours is you have to retreat by a sea move. And I think it's just 1 round of combat, right? Or no. Yep. All surviving ships are returned to the sea boxes from which they came. So this is kind of a problem. If I was in the patrol box and I caught and the sea transport box, I have to somehow differentiate those two. And it may not be too hard because ship combat probably isn't happening all over the place and everything, but, you know, again, a little mechanical problem here. It would be better to have, like, the sea patrol with a little box, I'm in battle, you know, because instead of the sea battle box, but whatever. All right. Privateers, when they're in the sea battle box, they can attempt to retreat back to where they came from. The owning player rolls the die for each privateer in the sea combat box. If they get less than or equal to the evasion number at the bottom of the combat table, then they get to evade. These are done sequentially, which means if I have multiple privateers who are trying to evade, they could reduce or improve the odds and make it so that it's harder for all of the ships to get away. Army organization. Stacking, there's no limit to the number of units in a box. Terrible. During movement phase, you can transfer strength points from one unit to another in the same stack. You can't eliminate a regiment this way, but you can eliminate detachments this way. What does that mean in terms of regiments that, you know, have strength points or whatever? And this is why I'm not sure I want to keep track of the detachments at all, because quite simply, I should be able to exchange pieces very, very easily. Now, there's a few little caveats to that. Cav can transfer strength points to infantry, but infantry can't transfer to cavalry. The fact that I can shift things between units, though, starts making it ridiculous that these detachments have to be kept track of individually. That's my issue there. And they say here, players will need to keep track of the parent regiment for each detachment which enters play. A detachment may transfer SPs to its parent regiment or any other infantry regiment of the same nationality if it occupies the same hex. A 1 SP detachment with a maximum strength of 2 may get a second SP from any regiment of the same nationality as its parent regiment. And all kind of weird stuff comes into play there, because if I transfer a strength point to something that's part of another regiment, now have I exceeded the total strength of that regiment? Do I have to worry about that? What's going on? I don't want to deal with these questions. They feel like picayune shit that isn't really going to affect the play too much. And unfortunately, it's not well supported in the rules. It seems like there's gamey ways to get around it if it's meant to be, if the rules are expressing, as I believe they are, this attempt to like restrict how big the regiments are going to be. Well, the fact that you can shift strength points between the regiments without that being in effect kind of just blows that all away. So it's like, why bother with this other shit? Why keep track of the detachments so carefully if I can just, shift Clan McDonald over to, Clan Mackenzie or whatever. All right. You can create detachments from cav regiments, but you can't transfer SPs to cav regiments from detachments. Even their parent regiment. Whoa, screw that, man. A regiment cannot transfer its last SP to a detachment. Okay, fair, or to another unit. Which is to say, your regiments have to, you can't just denude a regiment to combine, into one bigger unit for whatever reason, mainly so that you could rebuild that unit 3 turns later or something. I don't know. If the parent regiment is completely eliminated, yeah, we went into that. Movement, we mostly went into movement already. Okay, back to the minor island connections. These are small boats connecting the islands and the mainland. Okay, you can make normal land moves along these routes. Now, remember, these are also sea moves as far as I can see. Movement may be restricted by Hanoverian naval forces. If at any time they have 10 or more naval SPs, you can't do this anymore. But it looks like you're also allowed to do sea movement there, and that can't be intercepted, and whatever. Resources, if you want to move these, I think you have to have 1 unit for each resource, yeah. And that's artillery, the different artillery types of things. That's the arms resources and the gold. Whoever occupies or was the last to pass through a box controls it for game purposes. Control of a box can be contested with both sides having units present. When they're both present, combat takes place. Okay. We already talked about combat. We did not talk about overruns, and yeah, I'm kind of, if you're retreated or are routed, you lose any resource counters you're stacked with them. So remember, you drop arms if you're routed, but they may have had to be there's 5 or more units there or something. But everything else you leave behind just through a normal retreat. A leader left alone has a chance of escaping. Now, one of the interesting scenarios in this is Charlie and the Heathers or something like that, which is like Charles's semi-heroic escape running away as an old woman or something, where you start hunting him down. And there's no connection with that, with the campaign game. And I don't really want to play it. It's a hidden movement type of thing. But it gives you a little different rules to it. I'm not going to go into it because I'm not planning on looking at it. But, a cute little additional game to add to this that uses many of the same rules. The overrun. You move into a force that you intend to overrun. You're not allowed to examine the opponent's stack. So you announce you're going to attempt. The strength is revealed. If the overrunning force has 13 or more strength points stronger than the defending, the overrun is successful. With no combat modifiers, the defender is eliminated and the phasing player can continue moving. There are some restrictions, though. The attacking force doesn't have the strength. It has to stay in the box and resolve combat normally. You may be subject to multiple overrun attempts in the same movement phase. No more than 12 strength points can be, no force of 12 or more strength points can be overrun. You can't combine 2 different forces in the box to overrun. You cannot overrun across a river. You can't overrun if the defenders are in any kind of fortification, including a strong point, or if they're in a mountain hex. Now, here's the weird thing. If a force is going to be overrun and it's only cavalry, they can withdraw before combat. They reveal that their force is all cav, and they retreat to an adjacent box, which they'd be allowed to retreat to. If the enemy follows them, they can retreat again. This continues until the enemy force runs out of movement points. Now, there's no restriction on withdrawing, right? If a cavalry unit's retreat into a mountain, though, the pursuit ends and combat will follow in the combat phase, which, assuming the enemy follows them, I guess. So you're allowed to run away in the mountains one space, and if you retreat into the mountains from any space, mountains or otherwise, you can't retreat further, is the way I read that. I don't know if that's what they meant, but it's the way I read it. Boy, I'm kind of tired. Let me break for a bit. Casualties in combat, I haven't really explained that, but seeing the force march, I should mention this. You can't take them all on one unit. You have to distribute them one per unit, then a second one per unit, etc. Same thing with the force march. You roll on this table. There's a bonus for French and Jacobites and a bonus for the leader, but you could well, lose your forces. You can only move with a leader. I didn't explain that either. That's probably what's coming up here. And it's always rounded up. Okay. Jacobite leaders can command whatever they like. Hanoverians. Okay. Pure Hanoverians can command anything. The Hanoverian-aligned Scots can command anything except Dutch and Hessians. And the Dutch and Hessian leaders can only command their own units for movement. You're allowed to move a mixed force if you have leaders who could move it together, though, even if the overall commander couldn't move all of it, from what I can tell. Leaders have a rank. The royal leader is the highest rank, and then we have a certain number of stars on the counter, essentially. So, look at this guy here. He has, even though he's a king, 2 stars, or dots. They look like dots, so it looks like a combat strength unit. It's not. And that's the rank. The highest ranking leader in the hex, or in the space, will be the commander, even if he can't command the forces that are under him. And there's some tiebreakers here as to who does what. The royal leaders, if they have a rank marking, they command at the rank printed on their counter, and they can be outranked by other leaders. But royal leaders who don't have a rank outrank everyone else. Now, if you have a royal leader without a rank, you can refuse to use him, and you use the next highest leader in the space, and then that royal leader is not susceptible to casualties. Even if he's the only leader in the space, you can do this. Engineers are just like other leaders, except they have this potential bonus if they're thrown in a siege. Okay, when you get a leader casualty result, you roll a die. On a 1 or 2, the leader's dead. On a 3 or 4, the leader's wounded, and you roll another die, see how far on the reinforcement chart they show up. No matter what, if they run off the end of the scenario, they come back on the last turn of the scenario. I don't know why. I mean, why not just... Okay, if Charles and James III are both killed, Hanover wins. If George II and the Duke of Cumberland are both killed, the Jacobite player wins. If a leader's alone, he can be captured. He has a chance of escape. Okay. Then there's an attrition phase in the game. French and Scottish Jacobite forces in England and Wales are not subject to attrition. English and Welsh Jacobites are subject to attrition. And this is because they're near enough home that they'll just desert. Jacobites are not subject to any attrition until, and this is actually an errata that got put as a note instead, until the Jacobite player raises the standard in the August 3rd, 1745 turn. Units that are recruiting aren't subject to attrition, and units that are embarked on a ship at sea for some reason aren't subject to attrition. They probably have higher death rate, but nobody's getting off the boat. Okay, so what you do for this is you look up the area, you get an attrition number, you get a modifier to a die roll, and let's see. You roll a die, you add the regional attrition number plus the modifier to your die roll. And if you get higher than a 6, that's how many, the number over 6 is how many strength points you're going to lose, and those have to be distributed. A contested region in which both Jacobites and Hanoverians have at least 8 regiments adds 1 to the die roll for both armies. However, if you want to spend a gold, and this is what it's used for in general, except in the one weird scenario, you can reduce your attrition losses for that region, and you will take no attrition by paying your troops and feeding them properly. I think we've already talked about everything about fortifications that we really need to talk about, except maybe movement. You can't leave a fortification in a contested box, but you can try to overrun the enemy, or you can fight him out in the open. If you just captured an enemy fortification in battle, this is the only way it can happen, you can destroy the fortification. And there are little destroyed markers on the back of the fortification, the siege markers. And then it's out of the game. Okay. Now we get into the stuff that's not, these are the special Cromie rules, and one of the first ones is the clans. On the turn in which Prince Charles enters the Western Isles sea area, the Jacobite player immediately places all Jacobite clan regiments in their clan boxes. Now, this isn't actually all of them. They lie. They tell you here what the limitation is. Then, if you want to raise the central and northeast Scotland forces and lowland Scotland forces, you can only, those appear when Charles enters that region. All Jacobite clan regiments except the undecided clans are placed on the map. However, they can't be attacked. They don't move, attack, or recruit until the Jacobite raises the standard. They can't even recruit. Undecided clans. Some clans are undecided. You can attempt to convince them. You have to be in the region that they're from and use this persuasion table somewhere. Okay, maybe there it is. For each of the clans, you have to roll this number or greater to raise them. And if you fail, some government units may come into play instead. And some of these have special rules that apply to them, where some of the units come into play, but others do not, no matter what. And there's some modifiers to that. Okay. And if you fail, they're gone forever, and you may cause Hanoverian allied units to come in. After attempting to raise clans, you can then try to concentrate them by raising the standard. Now, this actually also brings some more forces on the board, from what I can tell, according to the reinforcements chart. But if Charles enters a box on the mainland of Scotland in the far north outer Hebrides or northwest inner Hebrides, and you place the standard with Charles, any Jacobite Highland units on the map can be immediately placed with Charles's army. You don't have to move there. It's an option. The standard must be placed in a land box in the far north or Outer Hebrides, northwest Inner Hebrides on the mainland of Scotland. If he's no longer in such a box, you can't raise it. The Jacobite Highland units, which could not reach the standard normally without crossing an illegal island move, I guess, can't move there. Those from undecided clans which enter play after their standard is raised are not placed until the first Jacobite reinforcement phase in which their box is Jacobite controlled. That doesn't answer the question I really want, but okay. On the turn following that in which Prince Charles enters northeast central region of Scotland by a land route, I assume it's any turn following, the Jacobite player may attempt to gather the Jacobite forces by declaring king. Prince Charles has to be either in Aberdeen, Perth, or Dundee to do this. After the reinforcement phase, he may move any of the northeast central units. Any Grant or Fraser persuaded to join to the box occupied by Prince Charles. And then there's some Jacobites which may show. If they're occupied by Hanoverian units, they're not placed until the Jacobites are able to get control of the space. Then the Jacobite player can declare the king in the lowlands region the same way, and he can concentrate lowland region units, and it all works the same. He has to be in Edinburgh for that to happen. What were the restrictions before? Aberdeen, Perth, or Dundee. Some of these are not clan units, but they'll be covered by the rule. Declaring the king in England and Wales. The Jacobite can declare the king on the turn following that in which Prince Charles occupies a box in a region of England. He must occupy a box in that region when the king is declared. The Jacobite player places all Jacobite units from that region in any boxes of his choice at a strength of 1 strength point each. That is, I assume, these other pieces here. This piece, still a mystery. Kind of like these pieces. I don't know. All right, French intervention. We'll see. French intervention. Jacobite successes will make the French units available. At the start of the game, the French intervention level is 1. As play proceeds, certain events allow it to increase. So when the prince raises the standard, that increases by 1. When he declares king, that raises it by 1. When he declares king in Edinburgh, that raises it by 1. When he declares king in England, that raises it by 1. When he declares king in southwest or southeast England, that raises by 1. It can be reduced if the king is declared in the southeast or southwest regions, but the Jacobite player has no remaining forces in those regions. If he returns back to them, they automatically increase. At each level, there's forces that will become available. In 1, Jacobite privateers, leaders, gold, arms, and artillery may sail to and from French ports. Some of these things are going to be showing up automatically in the French ports, and you can't move them. As above, the French and Irish can be moved along with French privateers. 3, as above, the French Royal Scots Ecossais Regiment, which is interesting because once it lands in Scotland, I believe you can raise a Jacobite equivalent to that unit or addition to that unit, which is another regiment. French 2 and 3 strength squadrons are released at 4. Irish regiments, remember we had Irish detachments up here, at 5. And at 6, everything including 2 Swedish regiments in the Scandinavian port box. Now, these are all actually time-based as well. So those units have to actually have made it on the map. And we have Scandinavian ports up there. That's where the Swedes show up. Hanoverian garrisons. When French intervention level increases, the Hanoverian player has to guard against a possible French invasion. And that's based on this, whatever the level is. You have to have so many regiments in those areas. They have to be 3 and 4 strength regiments. Initially, the Southeast has to have one, and I'm not sure it does. I didn't think so. Very, very interesting. Maybe there's enough detachments to count for that. There are 3 detachments down there. And if he doesn't do it, the Jacobite selects a Hanoverian regiment from any forces in a land box but not in fortification and move it down there. Hanoverian untried units. Okay, they have some units that are black with red marking, that are red with black marking, sorry. And government Scots regiments are also untried. Detachments never count as untried. When untried units constitute 25% or more of the total strength points, they take a -1 to any of their combat strength rolls. It's a modifier. If it's entirely untried, it's a -2 modifier. Likewise, Jacobite, Welsh, and English regiments, if they constitute half or more of the Jacobite force, they get a -1 modifier. If it's entirely theirs, it's a -2 modifier. Hanoverian deserters, when a force of 5 or more Hanoverian regiments loses a battle with a routed result, men will desert. The victorious Jacobite player may instantly add a strength point to his own army. They're switching sides. If the retreating force includes any government Scottish units, the Jacobite player can add 2 instead to his army. But this is not going to cause any losses necessarily. It's possible that a retreat could happen with very few losses. So like here, there's a retreat with 0. So some troops just appear out of the enemy army without hurting it. If a Jacobite force of 5 or more regiments wins a battle in Scotland, some men will desert. Now this is meant to represent looting and returning home with the booty because it's close and they get something. They may also desert after a successful assault on a fortification. If the Jacobites drive off enemy with a retreat result, they lose 1 SP from any unit of the Jacobite player's choice. If they win a battle with a routed result, they lose 2. Well, these two can kind of cancel each other out sometimes. James III. James III becomes available on the 2nd January turn in 46. And if French intervention is 5 or 6, he may enter play. During recruitment of the turn in which he lands in Scotland, the Jacobite player rolls a die and adds that number of strength points to any Jacobite units that are not in fortifications under siege, basically. All right, Bonnie Prince Charlie. He has some bad effects. He tended to throw himself into the command situation in ways that caused real problems to his commander. When he's present in a contested box during a Jacobite command phase, you roll a die. On a 6, he may take command, and he's not as good as Murray is. Old Mother Wade. Wade is got some restrictions where he has to command the largest Hanoverian army. And he's going to be facing a case of the slows. He must have Wade in command of the largest army in terms of strength points. He cannot be removed from command and must have another leader present as his second in command. He's not a very good leader to begin with. Each turn the Hanoverian player wishes to move his army, he has to roll a die. On a 1 through 4, Wade decides not to move for that turn. If he's not accompanied by another leader, or if his army falls below the size of another Hanoverian force, no Hanoverian force can move until he's got a second in command and has the largest force. Until Wade's requirements are met, Hanoverian units may only move to join Wade at the end of that movement phase. They may not make overrun attempts during their move. And leaders without troops are restricted as well unless they move to join Wade. Now, it specifies they must actually join him at the end of the movement phase, which could mean that, like, if a large British force is down here, it won't be able to join Wade if it's the second largest force, and there may not be enough forces within a movement, a turn's movement, to free anything up. So the Brits could kind of lose the game by the Wade rule from the way it's written. If we get into a stupid situation like that, we'll have to think about it, because it does seem a little harsh for a lousy command and control rule. Now, you're not allowed to create a force larger than Wade's, but it could happen due to combat. Hanoverian forces in the Dutch ports don't count against. Once Cumberland arrives in mainland Britain, Wade is relieved of any special rules. The Dutch. Once the Jacobites have a full-strength French or Irish infantry regiment, other than the Royal Scots Écossais, all the Dutch forces leave the game. Basically, the situation there is that the Dutch have been paroled from a siege that they lost, and, honors of war and all that. And their agreement was that they would not face the French in combat. If there's a potential that they might face the French in the campaign, they have to disband. And they'll just be removed from the game, basically, right? Any non-Dutch forces at sea aboard Dutch fleets return to the Dutch ports. Now, when this happens, though, Hanover starts getting some Hessians instead. And all the Hessian units show up in the Dutch ports at full strength. And you can try to bring them in with the English Navy. That is it, except for the scenario rules. Let me swap batteries again. Give you those. Yeah, this is a long one. Detachments that don't have a designated parent may be assigned to any eligible regiment which does not set up at full strength. This might cover what these are. The Hanoverian player may assign detachments to Hanoverian regiments which appear as reinforcements in the Dutch port box, and French and Irish to regiments that appear as reinforcements. These would then enter play at the appropriate reduced strength. Yeah. Resources are limited by the countermix. You must wait until the counter becomes available, which might mean that reinforcements are delayed, and we have to kind of keep track of what's been delayed. Ships are limited by a countermix, and when called for as reinforcements must be available to enter play. Units may be taken from previously eliminated, which makes sense because there aren't enough French and Jacobite ships. However, there are too many English ships, just like there are too many regiments, and I don't know. So far, I have not found anything that seems to generate those that's not, like these, there's rules for. This, there's not, and the English units, there's not. So I don't know. All right. Prince Charles lands in any part of Great Britain. Each game turn, until he lands, each game turn only consists of the naval movement phase. Both Jacobite and Hanoverian naval forces can move and fight normally. Only Jacobite ships may embark units, and they start out embarked. On the game turn in which the prince lands in a mainland box in Great Britain, the normal sequence of play commences. But remember, the troops can't actually be attacked. But I think you can try to arrest Charles, which might put the Scots in a bind as to trying to get there quickly. Normal play will commence no matter what by 3rd of August. Third turn of August, whether the prince landed or not. The victory conditions, okay. Jacobites win if they occupy London at the end of any game turn, and they have either Charles, Henry, or James, the three royals, there in London. They get a marginal victory if Jacobite or French units, this is at the end of the play, occupy Edinburgh and no Hanoverian units are in the Edinburgh castle itself. Or the Jacobites have one of the following leaders in Edinburgh, and they have one of the following leaders, Charles, Henry, or James III. Otherwise, the Hanoverians win. And as we said before, if you lose James and Charles, you lose the game. If the Hanoverians lose George and Cumberland, they lose the game. There is, let's see, there's some special Scenario 1 instructions which apply to the campaign as well. The current French intervention is 1, but the French forces that start on Jacobite ships are allowed to sail from the French forts. This allow you to get that initial landing. No further French units may do so until the intervention level reaches 2. These movement restrictions apply to the campaign game. No Hanoverian unit returning to Britain from the Dutch ports box may land directly in a Scottish region. Until Prince Charles lands in any part of Great Britain, each game turn is only naval movement. Yeah, we got that already. We've got our setup here. Mainly those Hanoverian units are there on the board. And we're not worried about the victory conditions for this specific scenario. But when this scenario ends, whenever that is, July 45, the victory conditions for it is to control the city of Edinburgh, but maybe not the fortress. And they must control 3 of 5 hexes in central northeast Scotland, Inverness, Fort Augustus. That's not really important if you're playing the campaign, but it gives you an idea of how far you should be progressing. So that's it. I'll try to play as best as I can, with the units that actually I have a designation for. It's possible that I've missed some units and we'll find them. I've looked through the sheet again and again, especially for the Hanoverians. It's possible that they're still there, that I just haven't kept track of them. Or maybe they exist as detachments, and that's what they're supposed to be, because I haven't been tracking that, and I'll look for that, but I haven't seen them mentioned. I haven't seen the particular units mentioned anywhere in the setup guidelines. So my feeling, and I have gone over it like 3 or 4 times now, my feeling is that those units are just not mentioned. And why? Well, my guess is, since there was a errata for the Scots, someone cared about the Scots enough to say, well, wait a minute, why are these units not here? And nobody gave a shit about the Hanoverians for some reason. I don't know. Maybe some counters were left out of the playtest kit, and the Scots counters were, correctly identified as why aren't these here, but for some reason the Hanoverian counters that were left off weren't given. Lots of reasons I can think of that this could have happened. What's harder to understand is the fact that there was no further errata. This errata appears to have been created before the game was released, embedded in the game, released maybe in a magazine or something, as kind of yet another fuck up in the whole process, even though they printed the rules correctly with the errata in it, and then marked as errata. And then there was just no more support, at least none that made it online. Maybe nobody gave a shit about this. It's such an obscure topic that nobody wanted to play it. I have no idea. To me, it's such an obscure topic that it was interesting. It's not another fucking World War II game. But I don't know. Maybe the Decision Game... Decision Games puts out a lot of things on weird topics. They were kind of the meat of weird topics. Well, they were the meat of everything at that point, but they covered a lot of weirder topics, and they've still continued to do so. But I don't know how they justified them if nobody was playing them. All right, let's send this crap up.